morning. Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. This morning we have a quasi-politician. No, if he's that far up in the office, he's got to be more than a quasi-politician. So in any event, good morning, Mr. Henry Haupt. Do I have him on board yet? Yes, good morning, sir.
Thank you for having me. We appreciate the opportunity to speak about Real ID.
Well, it looks like our visit this morning will be a little less controversial than your news release from yesterday.
Yeah. There's a press release regarding the Christmas or the holiday decorations. I should say Christmas, not holiday. In the rotunda there at our Capitol building. And it alludes to the fact that we have to, being America we are, let others who think differently than we do put their displays up. That has to could be kind of a tough assignment for you, Henry.
You know, and it wasn't our press release, but yes, the U.S., as you indicated, Bill, the U.S. Constitution First Amendment affords American citizens various rights, including the freedom of speech. And given that the rotunda is a public space and these temporary displays are not paid for by taxpayer dollars, you have to treat everyone equally. And it is a hallmark and a cherished principle of American democracy that organizations have the opportunity for freedom of speech. And it can be controversial, and this goes back, as you know, well over 100 years throughout this country. Individuals and organizations have been afforded free speech that others might not necessarily agree with.
Well, I don't think that my mother's cousin, who worked for Edward J. Barrett, who was Secretary of State, he was the executive clerk. I don't think they had those things to worry about back then in the 30s. So,
no, but they certainly had many other things to worry about. They had the Nazi menace coming from Germany at that point in time. So clearly there were other, even more dangerous and frightening things ahead back in the early 30s.
Yes, you know what I remember about that business is Charles Augustus Lindbergh, one of the heroes of the United States of America, became very active in the America First business. Gave speeches and so forth, and he and FDR had a big falling out. I remember that very vividly. And later on, Colonel Lindbergh was instrumental in going to the South Pacific and teaching our young pilots who were flying those P-38 Lightnings how to handle that airplane. I remember that just real vividly, and I'm 96 years old, so you know.
Well, kudos to you. That is an amazing time period, one that I've spent a lot of my time reading about, doing my part to learn about this country's illustrious history, and particularly what is often referred to as the Greatest Generation.
Well, it's pretty abundantly clear that you've done your homework in great shape. How long have you been in the Secretary of State's office, sir?
I've been with Secretary White his entire tenure.
Have you?
And I've been in this specific position as the press secretary downstate since 2007, March 1st, 2007.
You know, it's interesting, Mr. Haupt said downstate, and of course that points to the difference here. We are, you know, Chicago being upstate and being the big brother, and we folks down there at we're working on the Highland, as they say, and so we have a delineation. His territory is downstate as opposed to the whole state.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, it's similar to New York, just flipped, isn't it? In New York, it's upstate. Yeah,
I'd say exactly. And I don't think we don't have enough time to talk about New York. We have to talk to Henry Haupt about Illinois. What are some of your biggest? Well, this is kind of an open question. I don't want to throw you out there to the wolves on this question. I'm just going to ask you what some of the biggest problems are. The biggest problems are to try to satisfy the press, I guess, and they're insatiable.
I don't necessarily look at it that way. I look at it more as an opportunity. Once again, we're discussing various freedoms and cherished principles of this country, and one of that, of course, is freedom of the press. There are a number of countries that don't their citizens don't enjoy that right, and it allows the media to cover a variety of issues, some of which I may agree with, some of which I may not. But who am I to make the ultimate judgment judgment on what it is the news media decides to cover and how they cover it. All that I can do is provide them the facts to the best of my knowledge, which I try to do every single day. And, our job as stewards of this office is to run the office to the best of our ability, to provide the services that our residents need and deserve to the best of our ability. And, of course, there are times where it's a little more challenging, and this is one of them with the federal Real ID mandate, which is impacting all 50 states in similar ways due to the October 1, 2020 deadline. But we're doing everything we can to ensure that that our citizens know that it can make a educated decision on whether or not they wish to apply for a Real ID, because not everyone needs one or would want one, and if they do choose Real ID, what it is they need to do. And if we can get that information out to the public, we find that it makes the process smoother and simpler for everyone.
Well, that's the very issue that brought us together with you, actually, Henry. And I had thought that January 1st was going to be the date. Was I just totally mistaken once again? Or had they changed their mind?
No, the federal government has set the date as October 1, 2020. So beginning October 1 of 2020, the federal government will require you to use a valid U.S. passport or obtain a Real ID to fly domestically or to visit federal facilities. Now, as your listeners know, if they wish to fly internationally to France or somewhere, they, of course, need a U.S. passport to do that.
Right.
They also have grown accustomed to the fact that they can use their driver's license or ID card to fly domestically. That's their piece of identification. That's simple. That's over years and years. The driver's license and state ID cards around the nation have become essentially your proof of identification. Well, the federal government is requiring all 50 states to implement this Real ID program, which essentially requires people, if they wish to apply for a Real ID, which essentially requires people to start from scratch on proving their identity. And it's a means to combat identity theft, fraud, and even terrorism. And so the date is October 1 of 2020, in which the TSA officials at airports will require a passport or a military ID or a Real ID. And the difference between a Real ID and a standard driver's license physically is very small. The Real ID has a gold star in the upper right corner. That's the case in Illinois, and that's the case in the other states that are issuing Real IDs. And basically the difference in determining in how you get a Real ID is the documents you present at the facility. And if I could, Bill and Judy, I just have a few points I'd like to highlight.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. For your listeners, you have a choice. You do not need a Real ID if you have a valid U.S. passport or a military ID or other TSA acceptable form of identification. And you also do not need a Real ID if you do not fly domestically or you do not visit secure federal facilities like a military base. You can choose to keep your standard driver's license and just renew that whenever it's going to expire. And when you do that, you don't need any other additional identification. You just show up with your current license, and the process, of course, is very quick and easy. However, if you are somebody that does fly domestically and you do not have a passport or any of the there's a series of identification documents that TSA will accept at airlines after October 1, 2020. One of them is a military ID, but the document the majority of people would have would be a passport. If you do not have a passport and you fly domestically, the Real ID might be for you. And what we ask is that you please come to a driver's license facility prepared. It makes the process much quicker for everyone, including yourself. yourself and those in line behind you. So what we're asking people who wish to apply for Real ID to do is to please go to our website, realid.ilsos.gov. That's realid.ilsos.gov, and use the interactive document checklist. This checklist is designed to help ensure you bring in the proper documents required by the federal government, which will make the process much more efficient for you and everyone else. And the last thing we ever want to have to do at our facilities is to send someone home to get an additional document. I can give you a quick example of some of the documents that you can bring in and what the federal government requires. And again, if you go to our website and you use that interactive checklist, it's all laid out because there's a number of documents you could bring in that will satisfy the federal government's criteria. But first thing you have to prove is your proof of identity. And you do that primarily with a certified copy of a birth certificate, or you could bring in a passport or a passport card. But again, remember, if you have a passport or a passport card, you don't necessarily even need a Real ID. You can use that to fly after October 1 of 2020. So if you bring in your certified copy of your birth certificate, you would satisfy the proving your identity. Second, you need to provide proof of Social Security, and you can do that a few different ways. You could bring in your Social Security card. You could bring in a W-2, or you could bring in a pay stub. Just make sure that it's the full Social Security number and not the last four digits. Again, these are requirements set forth by the federal government. And then next, you have to prove your proof of residency. So the way to provide proof of residency is pretty simple. You need two documents, not one. The feds require two. Two examples would be a utility bill and a bank statement that are not 90 days old. So something within 90 days. There's a long list of potential documents you could bring in that would satisfy this requirement. That's why we ask people to go to our website. It makes it so much simpler. And then lastly, we ask that you bring in your current driver's license or ID card. And you provide those documents to the public service representative. And eventually what will happen, they will take those documents, they will scan them, they will then return them to you. And you will then leave the facility with a temporary secure paper driver's license or ID card. And within 15 days, your Real ID, driver's license or ID card, the card with the gold star in the upper right corner, will be mailed to you. Yep. A similar process exists for the standard driver's license, other than you don't need to bring in any of those documents, but you would leave with a secure paper temporary driver's license or ID card, and then your standard license or ID card would be mailed to you within 15 business days.
Is there a cost factor, sir, to have a Real ID?
It's the same fee. So if you're renewing if your driver's license is expiring within the year and you come in and to apply for a Real ID, it would be $30, just like your standard driver's license is $30. If you come in, let's say you expire in 2022, and let's say you don't have a passport, and you're aware of the October 1, 2020 federal deadline, so you want to fly before then, so you realize, or after October 1 of 2020, so you have to come in well before your normal expiration date. What will happen is you bring in all the same documents, you will be charged $5, not $30, and when you receive your Real ID, it will have the same expiration date as your previous card. Again, our example was 2022. The good news is with the Real ID, once you've obtained it, you do not need to bring in the documents again. You're done. So the next time, if you're a safe driver, you could actually even renew your Real ID or ID card remotely.
Well, there's my problem. He talked about safe driver.
Oh, well, that exists for everyone well before Real ID.
You mentioned, as Groucho Marx says, you mentioned the magic word.
Yeah, that's right, and then the chicken drops from the sky.
Yeah, right. Mr. Haupt, does the office have any handle on how many people have gone for the Real driver's license as opposed to the regular one?
Yes. In fact, we just eclipsed 500,000 real IDs issued in a fairly short period of time. It is amazing.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, we're asking our customers to please be patient at facilities when they apply for the real ID, because the process takes longer due to the multiple documents required by the federal government. And in some of our busiest facilities, we're seeing, well, in all of our facilities, but particularly the busiest ones, we're seeing an increase in customer volume, which again is not unique to Illinois. This is happening nationwide, and so we're doing everything we can to get people through as quickly as we can. And we ask that if they do apply for the real ID, please come prepared. That makes a big difference.
And be patient.
And be patient. And I'll give you an example of what can happen. If I come in and I'm applying for the real ID, and there's 20 people behind me that are applying for real ID, and I don't have all the right documents, that now requires that I have a conversation with the public service representative. And we don't mind having conversations, but that might take 2 minutes. We're explaining to them you need to bring a second residency document, for instance. Well, that 2 minutes then delays the 20 people behind the customer. So if everyone were to come in and have all their documents, it does make the process go smoother, and it can be amazingly more efficient. There's one other point I do want to make that I think is really important, and this has tripped up a lot of states, and that is supplementary documents that prove your name. So if you bring in a certified copy of your birth certificate, but your name today is different from the name that you had when you were born, perhaps you got married and took another name, the federal government requires you to bring in a certified marriage certificate. If by chance you've had 2 marriages, you would bring in a certified marriage certificate for both marriages. And that way the federal government knows you were born such and such, you then took a new name, and then 15 years later, you got divorced, you remarried, you took this name, which is your current name. And it's something we're highlighting, we're putting on our website, we're promoting as best as we can, and we're reminding everyone, please bring in a certified copy of your marriage certificate and a certified copy of your birth certificate. We've had a few people bring in the celebratory document they're given at birth, their parents are given, that has their little footprint in the corner that you get from the hospital. That is a ceremonial document. It's not registered with anyone. It's simply a nice keepsake, but it's not certified. So we ask people to go to our website, and we've at the bottom of our Real ID website, we have a list of resources you can go, and it helps you go to the right places to order these documents.
If I'm permitted, I'd like to make a personal observation about Mr. Haupt, Judy and Jim and listeners. I think he kind of comes across with the same mold. Now, Judy and I don't have exactly the same opinion about this. I mentioned coming up to the station this morning that I've had excellent results here at our State of Illinois Secretary of State's office. I've always found them very, very helpful, very courteous, and it's just been a good experience. Judy had one bad experience, and so she didn't agree with me 100%. But it seems like Mr. Haupt kind of represents what I have experienced at our local office here.
Yes.
He's a cornucopia of knowledge about this, and very patient in trying to explain it. So we appreciate that, sir. How long have you been there with Mr. White since he was first elected? Well, that's when they built the Ark.
Well, not quite that long, but he's been in office for 21 years. He's the longest-serving Secretary of State in the state of Illinois, and this is his 6th and final term, which runs through early January of 2023.
I think that Jesse could have that office as long as he wishes. He's run a good ship. He obviously has knowledgeable people, but more importantly, those people with whom I've come in contact have been good servants. They're very patient, and they they know what the heck they're doing.
Thank you. We try our best, and nobody's perfect, but we as I always was taught by my parents, as long as we're honest and we try our very hardest, people are pretty understanding.
Well, there's a tough thread to follow for some of these politicians. You mentioned the magic word honest.
Secretary is extremely honest, and one thing I did want to mention, going off base just a touch here, because earlier you had referenced the divisions in the state of Illinois. Most people assume Secretary White was born in Chicago, and he was not. Mm-hmm. He was actually born in Alton, not too far from the St. Louis area. So he's had affiliations with different parts of the state, going all the way back to his birth.
Well, I remember very well coming through the the infield down there at the state fairgrounds one time after a political rally, and I just happened to go by him, and we exchanged a couple of remarks, and I said, I think, Jesse, you got this one in your pocket. That was the first time he ran. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, and I'm the other guy. I'm the Republican type. And he said, well, that's interesting to know. So anyway, I was right about that. Mr. Haupt, would you give us a few seconds? We have a problem here. We have to have sponsors, and if we don't honor our sponsors, we're going to be in deep doo-doo.
We don't want that. I'll stand by, sir.
Thank you very much, Henry. Go right ahead, Jim. Here, Jim can get the cat moved off of the control board. The program, of course, is Viewpoint, appearing every Wednesday morning, 8:15 to 0900 hours. Our guest this morning is a very, very knowledgeable and very cordial gentleman, Mr. Henry Haupt, who is, would your title be in charge of public relations for that office, sir?
Yes, I take media inquiries. We put out press releases to inform the public of various initiatives. So that would be, and put together press events when we have them throughout the state. So it's an exciting job in that while I may think I know what my day will entail on a certain day, it could all change on a dime.
Well, they do that at the White House every day, so you can roll with those punches.
Yeah. I don't know if I can roll that well, Bill.
May I ask a question about organs and tissue donations? Do you have a way of checking on that? And what I mean by that question is, do a substantial number of drivers opt for that option?
Yes, our state the state of Illinois has some really generous people and thoughtful people. We have our organ and tissue donor program has expanded significantly, and we're now I believe we're at 6.7 million, and I can double check that here momentarily, but 6.7 million Illinoisans have opted to become an organ or tissue donor. And what's great about that is we changed the law back in, it would have been, we're actually at 6.8 million. We changed the law back in 2006. Secretary White took an initiative to change the organ and tissue donor law. Before 2006, we basically required, if you're going to be an organ donor, that you have two people sign the back of your license to witness your declaration. And then at the time of your passing, the doctors and the Gift of Hope individuals who are there representing the organ donor side would ask family, do you wish your son, daughter, mother, father to be an organ donor? And Secretary White said, we discovered about 20% of the family members said no. Leave us alone. Don't bother us. And what we learned is a number of those individuals would contact us later and say, it was not even I shouldn't even have been asked. I was just so grief-stricken that I lost my loved one that I said no. And I don't know why I was asked. So in 2006, we passed a new law called first-person consent. And it's essentially a contract. When you enter into organ and tissue donation, you are basically consenting that your organs would be donated at your passing. and your loved ones do not have to be bothered at that moment, and it's certainly a helpful initiative. But what was difficult was we had to start over in 2006. We started from scratch. We were at zero. So think about that. In just those 12 and a half years, or almost 13 years, we've gone from zero to 6.8 million Illinoisans. That's far more than half the state are registered donors. And we continue to look at ways. Secretary White recently initiated legislation, and it was successful and passed, that allowed 16 and 17-year-olds to register. And that's important because when you're 16 or 17, that's typically the first time you have any interaction with the Secretary of State. That's when you can obtain your driver's license for the first time. And these young people have been extremely generous. We've had almost 100,000 16 and 17-year-olds sign up, and that has boosted the registry considerably. And we were pretty close to 6.9 million recently. We might even be over that now. Basically, it allows these younger people to register to be a donor. And if you are 16 or 17, we do require your parent to sign off at the time. But we don't want any of their organs, of course. We want them to live long and productive lives. But it shows their generosity, these young people. I think sometimes they don't get the credit they deserve.
Well, that's nice to know. And it's rather surprising to me to know that we have that many who have signed on board with this and affirm what you're trying to do. People my age have a little problem. What we've got left isn't very good. So I'm not a prospective donor anymore, although it's on my card.
That is actually a myth, Bill. Regardless of your age, and again, we want you to live many more years, but regardless of your age, your organs could certainly help save a life or improve the quality of someone's life. Whether you're young or old.
Yeah, that's reassuring. That's good to know. Judy had a question here just a minute ago. I have to give her more than 50% of the time, Henry. Go right ahead, Judy K.
Henry, since you have such a successful program, have other states noted how well it's gone for you and tried to emulate what you've begun?
That's an excellent question. It's a really good question. To some degree, yes. Our state is a little bit unique.
Yes, it is.
It is. And I should say by our state, the Secretary of State's office is a little bit unique in Illinois. We have an office holder who's elected directly by the people. He's responsible for his actions, and he's up for re-election every 4 years, so that residents can choose if he's doing a good job or not doing a good job. And I think, I personally and truly believe that it makes the office run better because there's responsibility attached to the office holder. Most secretaries of state are not elected, state secretaries of state. They fall under the office of the governor. For instance, they're very small. They typically only have a few responsibilities. They basically file paperwork, and usually they oversee the election process. That's one of the few things the Illinois Secretary of State does not do. We have the State Board of Elections that does that. But so because of that, I believe that it allows our office to promote organ donation and differently than most other states might do. In a lot of other states, I'll give you an example, like Missouri, the agency that issues driver's license and ID cards is not the Secretary of State, it's the Department of Revenue.
That's interesting.
And again, this is the case in most states. I believe Maine and Michigan and Illinois are the three Secretary of States that issue driver's license, ID cards, and oversee organ donation. So, again, because of that, we're able to take Secretary White's prominence. He's a well-known figure, and he goes all over the state every day, and he talks about organ donation. Pretty much no matter what event we're holding, he will bring up organ and tissue donation. It's very personal to him. And if I could veer for a minute to tell a quick story about Secretary White. Before he became Secretary of State, his sister Doris became ill, and she was in dire need of a kidney, and there was not a match in the White family, in Secretary White's family, and so she, through the generosity of an unknown donor, she got a second chance at life, and she passed away last year, which was very sad, but she lived 27 more years because of the generosity of that donor. And Secretary White, when he became Secretary of State, he said, "This is my program. I am going to devote my, every waking hour to this program because I know it works. My sister's alive because of this program." And he's taken a real personal interest in it, and I got to believe that that's helped fuel the numbers. I mean, ultimately, it's the generosity of our Illinois residents that have allowed the organ and tissue donor registry to swell to almost 6.9 million. But I think Secretary White's played a role in his pushing it each
Well, he's led the way on that, and I have to think that's this being Illinois, we have some vagaries in politics around here. We have some dandies. We have some outstanding people. We'll not talk about the dandies. We could go the rest of the day on that. A few outstanding people like Henry Haupt and his boss, and I say that because we're getting the benefit of your knowledge and your time this morning. You're sharing it with our listeners, and we appreciate that very much, Mr. Haupt. Historically, the Secretary of State has had its own police force, I believe. Is that so from the very beginning of our Secretary of State's office? And how does that work out? And why is it necessary for the Secretary to have their own state police force?
Yes, it's codified in Illinois law, and Illinois Secretary of State police have a significantly different job than state police. They're required, for instance, to do a number of jobs that the state police and local police don't necessarily have to do. They investigate fraud that might occur at dealerships. They investigate scrap yards. They investigate misuse of placards, disability placards. They do a lot of investigations into identity theft and fraud. But something else that they do that has really become more well-known of late, and that is the Secretary of State also have a unit called the Capitol Police. And those are sworn officers that are stationed throughout the Capitol complex, and they protect the visitors who visit here because this is all public. We want Illinoisans to come see their Capitol. They should be able to see it, touch it, feel it, experience it, and we want them to feel safe. And, unfortunately, Bill and Judy, in the world we live in, things have changed a lot. Yeah. And I'm not sure there's a single Capitol in the country that doesn't have some form of police protection, whereas if you go back to the 30s, you referenced earlier, you could probably stroll in and out. There wasn't a metal detector to be seen. And now that is a way of life, and the Secretary of State Capitol Police make the visitors and the employees feel safe here, and it's a really important job. And incidentally and interestingly, as part of the Secretary of State Police, we also have the only statewide special bombs unit. We call them the Bomb Squad, and they get called throughout the state if someone finds a potential incendiary or explosive device. We ask people not to touch it, not to move it, to call their local law enforcement, who will then contact the Secretary of State Bomb Squad. We have uniquely trained individuals, and we have the tools necessary to ensure that if it is something dangerous, that they can render it safe in a very safe environment. And so they are performing a unique function that, you wish you wish it wasn't an issue, but given that it is, and that there are times where someone finds a device that they feel could be dangerous, we have people that have the knowledge, the capability, and the tools to protect the public, and that's just very important.
Now, in order to fulfill that part of your job, you must have these special police for the bomb squad located in stations all over the state. I mean, you can't wait in East St. Louis for somebody from Chicago.
No, we have Secretary of State police stationed throughout the state, and we have the capability of responding quickly. And that's a very good point. In fact, the head of our bomb squad is stationed down in southern Illinois, so he oversees the bomb squad statewide.
Isn't it a sad commentary that we have to have a bomb squad too?
It is. You could say the same thing about Real ID. If 9/11 doesn't happen, the Real ID mandate wouldn't exist.
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, there's one thing we have to accept, like it or not. There's some nuts out there, and there's no way of knowing who, when, and why.
That's right.
So we have to go with that very much. The vehicle services, we must have a lot of extraordinary number of vehicles that belong to the taxpayers run up and down the highway between Chicago and Cairo.
Yeah, there's over 11 million vehicles registered in the state of Illinois, which is an amazing figure. And we recognize, since you have to renew your vehicle registration each and every year, we've tried to automate the process so you can do so online. You can sign up for online renewals as well, or for online notification. So if you do that, we will email your address 3 times prior to your expiration on your license plate sticker as a friendly reminder, and we also give you a PIN number so you can do it from the comfort of your own living room chair or office chair in your home on your computer. You can, of course, come into a facility, but I think most people would prefer to do business at home if they can. And so we're doing everything we can to provide these services that are necessary for everyone. So it's a challenge, but it's one that we take seriously, and we try to do to the best of our ability and make it the most convenient service we can to people. Because as you mentioned, there are a lot of vehicles in the state of Illinois.
Judith, I just was going to say one thing, my dear. We've gone through our program with our courtesy of Mr. Haupt, and we've not done one thing. Say this is the telephone number to call in case anybody has any questions for the gentleman. 648-5510. Maybe one of our 2 listeners out there might have a question for him.
Or even both of them. You never know. No wonder Jesse White has enjoyed such a long term of service. He thinks about the people of Illinois even more than he thinks about Jesse White.
Thank you for that. And, I think it comes down to how he was raised and his background. I'd mentioned he was from Alton. He was born in Alton.
Right,
and
yeah.
Maybe what some people don't know, when he moved to Chicago, his parents moved for job opportunities, because I've talked to him about this. And when he went to he was a very good basketball player and a good baseball player and a good student. And he went to college. He was the first in his family to go to college. He got a scholarship to play basketball. At the time, it was Alabama State College. It's now Alabama State University. But here's the amazing thing. Secretary White left Chicago, where he could use bathrooms of his choice, drink out of water fountains of his choice, to Alabama, where now he could not. He was required to drink out of only certain water fountains. He could only use certain bathrooms. He could only sit in certain parts of the bus. So at age 18, Secretary White for the first time experienced the ugliness of segregation. And when he was down in Alabama, some of his friends had encouraged him to go to a local church. There was a young pastor who was very exciting and interesting. And so Secretary White began to go to that church. And the minister of that church was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh my gosh.
So Secretary White knew Dr. King, and he was down in Alabama. This gives me goosebumps every time I talk about it. When Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of the bus. And Secretary had gotten to know Dr. King, and Dr. King said, we are going to practice nonviolence and protest. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to desegregate the Montgomery bus transit system. Are you with me? And Secretary and all the other guys said, sure. And, they marched and they did their part, and ultimately they were successful. And so I tell you that story because the Secretary learned a lot from Dr. King, and that was even when you face the ugliness of racism and the ugliness of segregation, you don't respond with violence. You respond with, you stand for what you believe in, but you don't respond with violence. And I think, I just think that played a role in his life. His parents, of course, did as well. He had the opportunity to meet a lot of people. He served in the 101st Airborne Division of the U.S. Army, and he credits that experience with molding him to who he is today. And I think all of those, we're basically a collection of experiences in our life. Mm-hmm. There may be some things that are genetically imposed upon us, but for the most part, I believe we're a collection of our experiences. And so you look at Secretary White's life, and I believe he represents that to a T.
By virtue of some very defining experiences, no question about that at all.
Absolutely. I mean, the man volunteered to jump out of perfectly good airplanes.
Yeah. I always wondered about those paratroopers. I was an Air Corps guy myself, but I always said on absolute necessity. So we appreciate very much your time with us, Mr. Haupt. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had Mr. Henry Haupt, who's spokesperson for the Secretary of State's office, and a whale of a spokesperson, Judith Kay. Good. I have to tip my hat to you. Good call for you on that one. Thank you very much, Henry.
Bill and Judy, I greatly appreciate your time, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you, sir. We're going to close with our usual close. Be the reason somebody smiled today. Thank you very much for Viewpoint.